Okay, so we are now on to the registration part of the tutorial. This is going to be slightly longer just because we need to include validation, so if specific fields exist. We also then need to check other things like whether the user exists, whether the email is being used, whether the email is a valid email address, whether the password is greater than 6 characters, for example, just to enforce some kind of security. But you can adapt this for your own purposes, and if you do add more fields, you can go ahead and adapt this further. So the first thing we're going to be doing is actually building the form, and then we're going to look at basically submitting the form back to this registration page. And that will be it for now. Then we'll go on to obviously completing this. So we're going to go from start to finish essentially. So at the moment the user would be on here and they'd click register. We've created the register.php page, but we haven't applied any styling or anything like that to it. So let's go ahead and open up our index page, copy the contents in here across, and let's go ahead and say register, and anything within here now will be shown on this page with our template. So when I click refresh, when I click register, we get this register here. So let's go ahead and just start building the form up. We're not going to worry too much about the specifics of building forms and should you use a field set or anything like that, or a table. Tables are acceptable to lay out forms and things like that, but I'm just going to be using an unordered list because it makes just life a lot easier. We have the styles in place in this base template for the tutorial to deal with unordered lists and lists, styling them correctly, but this is really up to you. I'm going to start a form element. I'm going to have an action and a method to this. So basically the action is where this form is submitted. We've already looked at this with the login process, and I'm just going to leave this blank, which will submit it to the current page. The method is going to be post. We're sending this data as post data for one of two reasons. For two reasons. The first reason is that this won't be shown in the URL bar, so it's not impossible to modify. It's not impossible to modify this data. But it does make it a lot better if you're not submitting things through the URL. As well, with sensitive data like passwords, these will show up in the URL bar if you as a query if you were using get, for example. Also, post supports much longer data lengths, so we can post big text areas without anything being prematurely cut. Okay, so within here I'm going to use an UL. And then within here I'm going to have list items. So this is an unordered list with several list items. So for example 1 and 2, when I go and refresh, you'll see I have got 1 and 2 underneath each other. So it makes perfect sense to use this to lay our form out. So let's go ahead and just put all of the form fields that we actually require in. We're not going to be adding anything special like the gender or whether they want to sign up to a mailing list or anything like that. We're just going to be doing first name, last name, password, repeat password, because we need to obviously ask them for them to type their password twice, email address, things like that. So anything that's stored within our database. So the first one is first name. No, let's ask them to choose a username and a password first. So username, I'm just going to place a star there, or an asterisk rather, just to say that this form field is required. I'm going to do a line break, and then I'm going to do an input type, an input field. The type is going to be text. The name of this is very important. This is how we're going to pick this up in PHP. So I'm just going to call this username. It's obvious that we identify it like that. And then that's it. So that is our first field done. You can see that there. So let's crack on with the others. So the next one is going to be the password, which is obviously required, and this is going to change very slightly. We're going to have a type of password instead, as we've seen in our login form already, and the name of this is going to be password. So let's go ahead and duplicate this item, and I'm going to say password again, and I'm going to call this password again. So everything's staying the same except the variable name here, password and password again, and we're going to check if these are equal to each other when we actually validate this a bit later on. So the next one is going to be the first name, which I'm going to ask for being required. The surname I'm not going to ask for being required. So a line break there, and that's obviously going to be text, and the name is going to be first underscore name. Now what I'm trying to do is keep these variable names the same as I'm storing them in my field, in the fields in my database table. So first underscore name, last underscore name, just to keep everything consistent. So when I'm submitting this, it makes a lot more sense. So the second one of the name is going to be obviously the last name, and I'm going to remove the asterisks, obviously change this variable name here, and then we're just going to ask for the user's email address. So that's the last one, and that stays exactly the same as the text field. You could, I suppose, use the HTML5 email field, which enables client-side validation, but I'm not going to worry too much about that for now because it's irrelevant in terms of the tutorial. So this is going to be called email, and the type is going to be called text. So let's go ahead and take a look at our page, refresh, and we've got all these fields. Perfect. Now we're missing one thing, and that's a submit button. So I'm going to go ahead and say input type equals. This is going to be submit. We don't need to give this a name because we're not picking it up within PHP, but we do want to give it a value. So the value is just going to be register, and that will change the label on the form. So we've now got a button that is called register. So we have set up our form. This is going to allow the user to enter data. We click register. We pass these variables which we've named here, and we're going to pick them up in PHP. We're going to run through them, make sure the ones that we want exist, and then we are going to pass these to a function. We're going to validate them, so we're going to use our errors array like we've done before. We're going to pass these to a function when when we don't have any errors present. And this function is essentially going to take a specific amount of parameters, a variable amount of parameters. So we're not going to define the parameters, but what this function will do is it will pick up our values, much like we did with the user data function. So let's go ahead and into our core functions users. Remember, user data, we use the funcnum args and the funcgetargs functions to pick up the variables within here. And we're going to use the same method for our registration script. The reason being is that if we were to submit all of these variables and then we want to add, say, a middle name, so say we wanted to add, copy and paste this down and add a middle name, all we would have to then do is validate this middle name using our methods, and then we just pass it through to the function. We don't need to update the function. As long as we've got these names here the same as our database tables, it doesn't matter. We can pass it through, it'll update our database, and we don't need to worry about it. It makes your application a lot easier to manage in the long run. So obviously, this is very long, having to type out all the form fields. There are easier ways to do things. There are easier ways to store arrays or objects of data that you want to include and iterate through and generate these fields. But for now, we're doing it the long way of doing this, just because it's a lot easier. So let's go ahead and just test this out without doing anything. When I refresh and click register, it just comes back to our page. Nothing's happened. You'll notice just quickly, this is just for anyone that hasn't worked with different methods in forms before. If I was to change the method to get and click register, you can see that we get all these queries, this query after our page name. So we've got username equals something. So if I was to type Alex here and then click register, you can see that this has passed this data through. You need to think of the posting process instead of the get process. It works in exactly the same way, but passes it, using a different method. It stores it in a different way. So as long as you think of it in terms of just passing data to another page, then you'll be absolutely fine with this. So let's go ahead and just quickly create a check that our form has actually been submitted. So I'm going to say if, and then in here I'm going to use empty, and I'm going to say $_post, and that's it. And if this is equal to false, that means that the form has been submitted. So I'm going to echo form submitted. Okay, and that's essentially it. So if I go ahead and press enter here, nothing's coming up. When I click register, it says form submitted. Now we obviously don't want any output above our header. We're going to output any errors down here later. We're going to do all of our logic up here and all of our outputting down here. So for now, that's how we've constructed our form. We have checked that the form has been submitted, and in here we are actually going to do all of our processing, and then obviously pass it through to that function I was talking about. So that will be in the next part.